Excellent, perfect. So welcome to this newest episode of our webinar entitled Sounds Like Sustainability. And Sounds Like Sustainability has a couple of dot points at the end, which means this conversation is a conversation that should be critical, a conversation where we reflect on what sounds like sustainability and is actually related to sustainability, but we will also talk about things that sound like sustainability, but they aren't. So this is a webinar or conversation organized by the IECA, the International Environmental Communication Association, in a collaboration with the Centre for Communication and Social Change at the University of Queensland in Australia. And this conversation is something where we have amazing people to talk to about sustainability and what sustainability is. And of course, we will have a bit of an interview setting. So I will ask a couple of questions and then we will open up the floor for questions that come in from everyone who joins us today. I'm absolutely delighted to have Professor Sigrid Kannengießer today in this conversation. So thanks for being here. This is amazing. And I would love to say hello from the IECA, from the Centre for Communication and Social Change. And of course, personally, it's amazing to have this conversation with you. I'm really looking forward to this. So before we get started exploring what sustainability is and what it might be and what people think it is and what some research perspectives on sustainability include, before we do that, I would love to say officially hello and invite you to say hello to everyone in the audience and maybe to very briefly introduce yourself. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Franziska, for the invitation, and thanks for being here. Hello to everyone. My name is Sigrid Kannengießer. I'm a professor in communication studies with a focus on media sociology at the University of Münster, which is a university in northwestern Germany. My research focus is on sustainability and digital media, mainly media practices. I'm analyzing in different case studies that we might talk about how different actors, individuals, but also non-governmental organizations, activists, but also companies use digital media to contribute to sustainability. That's the biggest research focus at the moment. I'm also dealing with questions of sustainability and artificial intelligence, the research field of energy in media and communication studies. These are also related to questions of sustainability. And then in other research areas that I'm dealing with, I'm also analyzing with a practice perspective how people deal with surveillance capitalism that we are living in. So critical media practices, data literacy, crypto parties are also aspects that I'm dealing with. And gender media studies is another kind of cross-cutting field in this areas of sustainability studies and data studies.
Amazing. That's so cool. And we will definitely talk about the media perspective or the perspective on digital media when we look at sustainability and the contribution of these new technologies to sustainable development. What we might also talk about is your focus on energy and your recent research there, because I know that someone in the room I work with on a project on hydrogen, and so this is why I'm definitely happy to talk about this. But first of all, in this webinar, what we always do is we contribute to the title of the webinar or this conversation, and the title is Sounds Like Sustainability. And therefore, my first question would be, where are you at the moment? Are there any sounds, or even beyond the space where you're in at the moment, are there any specific sounds that you would relate to sustainability?
Yeah, at this moment, I'm hearing wind, and that's I think for me is connected to questions of sustainability, because wind for me, in northern Germany during the winter, we have kind of strong winds, also in autumn and spring. And wind for me is related to weather, and weather and changes in weather are related to the climate crisis that we are confronted with. So wind actually, I think for me is a strong symbol of how the climate is changing, how weather is changing because of climate change, and that although I'm hearing wind at the moment, maybe in a couple of years there either would be less wind during the winter or even stronger periods of wind. That might even, which we are also experiencing in northern Germany, where I'm living. We are experiencing more catastrophes also due to the weather changes and climate change. So that's one of the sounds that I'm hearing at the moment that I would relate to sustainability. Another sound that I'm usually relating to questions of sustainability are the cars that are driving through the city that I'm living in. And so these cars are, for me, also a symbol for the challenge we are facing at the moment. Also, not only, but also regarding climate change, all the emissions, but it's not only the emissions, but it's also broader questions of sustainability. It's some kind of noise pollution that I'm experiencing there. And I always ask myself why, and I think that's also special, not only, but also for Germany, why is there not a radical change regarding mobility that we use? So we know all these problems that we're causing with this mostly individual car mobility, but we're still sticking to it, and thereby provoking this crisis of climate change. And it's also, you're asking about sounds of sustainability, but I think it's not only sound or the sense of hearing, but this car mobility, for example, also always relates to my sense of smelling, because it always stinks. And then at this moment of our video conference, there's not only sounds that I hear, like the wind, but it's also things that I'm seeing. So it's another sense that that is related to sustainability, and these are the lights. So there's not so much daylight in winter in northern Germany, so I had to put my lights on, and the lights are actually related to questions of energy, and like, where is the energy coming from, especially in this moment of energy crisis that we have, but also besides this crisis of war that we have at the moment. I think it's also always the questions of renewable energies. So sound is one sense, or hearing, the sound of sustainability is one aspect of sustainability, and I think it's always connected to other dimensions.
And it's really fascinating how this kind of thinking and this sensual feeling, then kind of how many associations come up and how many thoughts come up immediately if we start thinking about, okay, what of that is related to sustainability. And there are two things that I will have to pick out here. Like, one thing is that sustainability somehow is more or less always related to climate change. So I would love to kind of talk a bit about that, like why is sustainability somehow the counterpart or the complement or an answer to or a solution to. I think there are different ideas around or different concepts that talk about sustainability related to climate change. And maybe we can talk a bit about that. And then the other aspect that most of the time comes up in these conversations is this massive moral challenge for us as individuals and our individual behavior. So then we start to think about sustainability, that it always kind of brings us back to where we are, what we do, and how sustainability now is somewhere there in our mind, tiny little normative principle that tells us a bit about, okay, that's bad behavior, that's good behavior. Driving a car is less good behavior compared to going by bike, going via public transport. And this is another, I think, phenomena that we can talk about that comes along pretty automatically with sustainability, that we somehow have this kind of big concept, and we see like the United Nations and the Sustainable Development Goals and all those kind of big things out there that are rather abstract and far away. But by the same time, if you start thinking about it, then you can see the light. Like, well, it's evening here, so the lights are switched on here. But my sound of sustainability or unsustainability is our shower that is leaking. It drives us crazy. And we started to switch off the main tap. So we have no water in the house during the day and during the night. And that's it's like horrible. And you go crazy and you hear it dripping and you feel like, oh my God, like this is so unsustainable. And it's just those kind of tiny little individual experiences that you make where you feel like, oh, sustainability is there, because it's really not only directs my behavior, but much more it works as this tiny little principle or moral principle that where I start to evaluate not only my own behavior, but other people's behavior, certain sounds and things I see and things I hear and things I smell as like either good or bad or related to climate change. So maybe we start with this individual behavior thing, because that's someone I think everyone can relate to, and then we'll talk a bit about why sustainability is somehow related to climate change, and then where media come into play. So if you have any thoughts on this individual behavior and maybe where there is a certain danger, or how we can look at this a bit more critical, is it only positive that sustainability is, we are educated more and more in sustainable behavior and unsustainable behavior? So what does that do with us on an individual
level? Yeah, thanks for your thoughts and ideas. I think with talking about the individual, actually responsibility, I think to what you were just saying, I think it's always the question of responsibility. So who is actually responsible to shape our societies in a more sustainable way? And there is a focus on the individuals and demanding a change in behavior, at least in the Western European countries and Northern American countries and Australia. That's why it doesn't, I think the debate is very different in Asian, some Latin American and especially African countries, but still in our so-called Western context, I think the whole debate on sustainability, both in academia, but also in politics, and especially in the economic section, the focus is always on the individual, demanding or relating, stressing the responsibility of the individual regarding sustainability. And I think this is, as you just mentioned, it is also a problem because, of course, we are like in our consumption cultures, if you want to call it like that, we all have a responsibility to consume less and to consume objects that are sustainable themselves. So the questions of fair trade, for example, is a huge issue in the sustainable consumption debate. And I think there is, of course, this responsibility. But then again, in this so-called consumer societies, not all people are actually able to consume. So we have this huge gaps between rich and poor people, for example. And then sometimes it's not very appropriate to ask people who can't afford fair trade products, for example, to stress their responsibility in consuming fair trade products, because there's just not, they don't have the money for that. It's one issue within the so-called consumer societies. And then, of course, we have the problem that individuals in economic less or least developed countries, we can't really stress their responsibility regarding consumption and regarding sustainability, because what's gets very important or very obvious there is, or are the other levels, like the meso and the macro levels, and the connection of the individual level to the meso level and to the macro level, because it's not only, of course, the individual that is responsible in shaping our societies in a more sustainable way, but it's also organizations, it's the companies, and it's, of course, also actors that are shaping the macro levels, like politics, for example. And I think that's something that we perceived regarding or with the Fridays for Future movement, that they stressed, okay, of course, it is also about individual behavior, but it's mainly about also about how in which systems, in which political and economic systems we are living in. So of course, you can change your consumption behavior if you are in the situation of being able to afford it. But then again, I think also if we look at initiatives that are trying to produce products that are more sustainable, for example, at one way or the other, they are all challenged by the system we are living in, which is capitalism. To give you a concrete example, maybe, and to relate it to media and communication studies, I did two empirical studies in which I was analyzing media practices with which people try to shape digital media or appropriate digital media in a more sustainable way. So one was the repairing of digital media and so-called repair cafes. Repair cafes are events that are organized publicly for people to repair their objects of everyday life together. So these are events that are mainly happening in Western Europe and North America, although the practice of repairing, of course, is a very old practice, and it's practice, of course, all over the world. But these repair cafes, even though the practice is not new, and even though people always repair together, they are politicized since 10, 15 years as events for sustainability, as events where people come together to contribute to sustainability. And So I was I conducted a case study where I was analyzing different repair cafes that were happening in Germany. And people who were organizing the events, who were offering help in repairing media technologies, and also those people who came to repair cafes and brought their broken devices with them to repair them, they all told me that sustainability is the main goal that they are striving for when they are repairing. And but they were different challenges regarding this goal and regarding sustainability. So one challenge, for example, lies within the devices themselves that people are repairing. So some of the devices could not be opened anymore because of the way that they were manufactured, for example. Other devices, even though they were they could be opened, had other aspects of planned obsolescence, for example. So even though you could open the device and you were able to identify the problem, these problems couldn't be solved, for example. And then there were some kind of contradictions regarding the practices of everyday life. So people told me that they are repairing their devices because they want to they want to prolong the lifespan of the devices. But then they also told me, for example, about their holidays in Africa, Latin America, their regular holidays, for example, or other consumption practices. So you could actually identify that actually living a very sustainable life in our sustainabilities, at least in Western Europe and in Northern America and Australia, but also, of course, other countries, is actually quite challenging because it's so complex. And so this would be also an example of the individual level and the challenges of sustainability there. And then another example is the Fairphone that I analyzed in another case study. The Fairphone is a smartphone that was developed by a Dutch company, and it should be a Fairphone that is produced in a modular way, so it can be repaired with sustainable resources, for example. And regarding the resources, for example, there are only a few resources that are actually produced under fair conditions that are integrated in that smartphone. So you can perceive here another challenges of sustainability on a different level, on the meso level, because the company itself stresses that it's an effort. The smartphone that they produce is an effort to produce technologies in a more sustainable way, but it was, or it is, not possible for them to actually produce a real fair smartphone. And both examples have to be contextualized then into this macro dimension, into the system we're living in, because in all, either regarding the individual consumption or the ways products are produced, for example, they are all related to the capitalist system, which is in its core, I think, a system where exploitation is so much in the center of the ideology, and so all these practices on the different levels always come back to this questions of capitalism or the problems of capitalism that actually have to be addressed. So long answer, sorry, but if you ask about the individual level, then of course there are responsibilities. And at the same time, there are problems, because who actually can be responsible, and or who has the possibilities of actually living more sustainable. But then again, these practices, these questions of responsibility always connect to responsibilities that we definitely can perceive on other dimensions, on the meso level or on the macro level as well. And they also have to be addressed.
I really like that's always like, you can't look at individual behavior just as it is. It's always important to contextualize it in like the broader system, in the cultural context, and all the whole set of patterns and procedures that are representative for this culture, as a Western culture, if it's an Eastern culture, if it's then a very strong economic capitalistic system we're talking about here. And of course, those organizations on this level between that, they do have a massive impact in very clearly allocating responsibility to individuals, especially corporates do very well, and they've always done so for decades now. But by the same time, they do have the chance to implement new rules and to teach us different or new behavior. What I thought was really, really interesting, what you said, is that the Fair Phone people said, oh, like it's an effort towards sustainability or towards a more sustainable way to design and to produce phones. And I think this is very, very interesting, because I think sustainability is a lot about, and especially on an individual level, it's a lot about taking the effort and taking the extra effort. And this is why there is such a massive clash with the capitalistic system, because the idea of the market is to make it as easy as possible for us as individual consumers. And if we like that, every product serves us in the best way, so that we don't have to take the extra effort, that we don't have to be, I don't know, smart and buy another device. No, everything is kind of like, we can actually be pretty lazy. We are served really well with a broad range of products delivered whenever we want them to have, and all that. So to take the extra effort is, I think, a behavior pattern or something that is included in individual behavior that is related to sustainable behavior, because we need to do the extra effort and not jump in the car, but take the bike, even if it's very windy, if it's stormy, if it's rainy. We need to take the extra effort to research the Fairphone, research what it means, research what it costs, and we have to order it. And then we have to consider, oh, well, bad luck, because I really wanted to order it, by the way, when we moved to Australia, and they said, oh, Australia is too far away, we can't do that because we deliver within Europe. I'm like, okay. So it always includes this extra effort, this extra thinking, and thinking something through till the end, in terms of, okay, if I buy this, what do I do with it if it's not working anymore? So this kind of thinking further, thinking something through till the end, and taking this extra effort, this is somehow included. And I really like this thinking, because here I think organizations, and especially corporates, have already realized that they have to take the extra effort. So they have to be extra cautious. They do need to do a bit more. I think that's a very, very interesting aspect. I would love to kind of like stick with this media and digital media question, because that is really interesting, and this is definitely new, a new perspective that we are touching on in this webinar series. And so one, like when we talk about digital media, one thing is that we talk about the devices, that we talk about, okay, how can we do this better? And what about recycling, repairing, refurbishing. How do we deal with the technology? But what is, you mentioned artificial intelligence, you mentioned new technologies that are not about a certain device only, but they go beyond. What is the potential there? We think about doing things differently. What is the potential that we need to take? Like if we, and I think this is something we all realize, that we need to do more and we need to do better. What is the potential here from your perspective?
I think that, first of all, I think it's always, if we look at new technologies, or also new media that we are using, often these media seem to be very fancy or shiny, or yeah, this it's always this, well, not always, but there's mainly this positive, I think, also way of looking at these new innovative technologies, and I think that every new technology, of course, also gives new options in communicating, in well, actually acting differently in society, for example. So artificial intelligence, for example, gives new options to our students in writing term papers, for example. But then I think you have to have this, you have to look at the material dimension that is always that these new technologies, new options are based on. So, and I think this is also what sustainability research in media and communication studies has to do. Of course, it's very relevant to look at the content, for example, that is produced relating to sustainability issues. But we always also have to look at the materiality, which is the infrastructures, for example, that the new technologies are based on. So if we look at the relation between artificial intelligence and sustainability, for example, one relevant research question is how the infrastructures of artificial intelligence can be shaped in a more sustainable way. And I think there are many possibilities, many positive issues that this technology of artificial intelligence brings with it, also regarding sustainability. Because with artificial intelligence, for example, there are studies that are analyzing at the moment how communication can be more efficient, for example, and thereby reducing carbon emission, for example, in the data centers. But I think these are questions that can't be answered easily at the for now, because there need to be more studies, and it's quite challenging because, for example, it's a challenge to actually measure how much carbon emission is produced by artificial intelligence, or the use of artificial intelligence in these data centers, and how much is produced by other forms of online communication, for example. And of course, we need more research there, but then I think stressing that we need more research can't be an excuse for actually needing to implement what we actually know at the moment, because we know that we definitely have a problem with carbon emission through the data centers. So of course, we need to know also what the the amount might be there that's produced by artificial intelligence, but the action that we have to take, I think, is not only related to this very detailed knowledge about which communication or which media practices produce what, but we know that we have a problem when data centers are run by fossil energy, and that it doesn't really matter if it's which form of online communication it is, but we have the problem of energy there. So I think we need to address that already, and we know, because we were talking about the ecological dimension of sustainability so much, but we also know that we are having so many social problems regarding the production of the technologies, for example. So we know about the situations in the mines in Congo, for example, where people, and often children extract the coltan that we need for every digital device. And we need digital devices for using, of course, for using artificial intelligence. So, but we know about the problem in these mines. So I think of course, we need more studies about the effects or the possibilities and the challenges of artificial intelligence. But there are so many things that we already know, which are the problems of sustainability related to AI, which we, I think, in academia, but also in the political system, for example, and in economy, need to address and solve. So, and of course, every new technology brings new challenges, new problems, but also new possibilities. But we haven't solved the old problems, actually, which are continuing
and accelerating
with new technologies.
Yeah. So it brings us a bit back to like the second question that I asked at the very beginning, the relationship between sustainability and the climate crisis, and why and how you describe sustainability. Is it the idea or the concept of sustainability or sustainable development as a process? Is this kind of a process of finding the best solutions to the most recent problems, or is it just a different story, basically of the same phenomena, that things are changing and in a bad way? Or what is sustainability related to the climate crisis? Where does it sit from your perspective on a more kind of definition, like from a definitory perspective or terminology?
For me, sustainability is always related to questions of justice, and it's not only justice among human beings, but it's also which are then a very relevant aspect in the social dimension of sustainability. But it's a very broad idea of justice that also means justice for the environment, for example, for animals, for example. And I think, and it is about the question of the good life, I think. I think if we talk about the good life in current societies, I think it always relates to questions of sustainability and to questions of justice. And as you asked about climate change is, of course, one of the main crises that we are confronted with at the moment, and we urgently need to take action, not only to prevent climate change, or to reduce the horrible effects that we are looking, or that we might be confronted with. But climate change is already here. It's already happening, and there is. So people are actually already dying. Animals are actually already dying because of climate change. So and I think that's something that we, being located in Europe, or you in Australia at the moment, I think that's something that we always have to have in mind, that that actions for sustainability are not only actions for the future, but it's actions that are so that we urgently need to take also for people today, and for animals today, and that also shows that sustainability, or the questions of justice, of course, are related to climate change, but not only. So sustainability, of course, it's also criticized very often as being a very broad concept, and you can relate everything to sustainability. But I think that's not only a bad thing or a problem, because actually it's also a possibility to stress that all questions of justice can actually be related to sustainability. And sustainability is I think, it can also be differentiated, or if we look at, okay, what actually is sustainability, then it can be related to many different norms that are integrated in that concept. And that actually brings me back to what you were saying about the efforts, that we all need to take more effort in contributing to sustainability. Yes, I totally agree. But then again, I think sustainability is not a burden, but it's something. So it's not only about effort, because there are so many positive things that you can experience. So going back to the repair cafes, for example, it's not only an effort to actually go there and repair your smartphone or laptop or whatever, but you experience so many things in this repair cafe, which are very, very which are very positive experiences, like the experience of being part of a community, for example, talking to people, like all these social aspects that are also in there in this idea of a repair cafe. So I think if we talk about sustainability, at least in the so-called Western context, I think it's also about questioning our norms and asking ourselves, okay, which norms do we actually construct and follow in our capitalist systems? And are these norms that are actually positive for us or not? And if we change these norms, of course, we change maybe our everyday practices and the way we live. We change, but we also change our idea of communities, for example. And we can follow different norms that, but that are not an effort, or that we can't only reach in taking more effort, but in very, very positive ways, actually.
Yeah, I really like that. And what I think is especially interesting from a communication perspective is what you said, and kind of bringing sustainability back from the future to the now, and that this is something where all the communication around it on an individual level, but also on an organizational level, and even on a broader societal level, on a media discourse level, is so important to not. And it's really interesting because if you talk to corporates, they want to get better in telling the story about the future, which is really interesting, and it's counterproductive if we say, oh, like it is so super urgent that we need to kind of just bring it back from these future scenarios and future fuels and whatever future, especially like in the energy field, is talked about, to the, okay, what is it actually that we do now and that we need to do now? Really, really interesting. I don't want to just kind of go forward into talking more about the energy space. I think it's really interesting, but I would love to kind of open the floor before we might talk about this as the last question or the last point. I'd like to open Niloufar, Jazz, anyone else, question, anything that's in your mind that you want to ask or put on the table.
Yeah, hi, this is Niloufar. I have a quick question. From my perspective, looking at the matter somehow from the psychological aspects, I can see that corporations, capitalism, all businesses functioning in our current world, they are kind of struggling with their existence, you know? And it could be somehow an existential problem, you know? They are kind of using consumerism, using advertising, advocacy advertising in order to somehow maintain in the market, you know. They have no choice but to follow the rules of this competition in order to just have a say in it. And in psychology, we mostly say that you need to first acknowledge the problem, and they are not acknowledging the problem. I think maybe to get out of this cycle, we can kind of somehow contribute to the society, acknowledge their problem, their issue of sustainability, responsibility, and things like that. What is your opinion about the role of media in helping the society understand that they are facing something and they cannot no longer deny that, you know? In my perspective, the problem is denial, because we're not accepting that the way we are living is hurting ourselves, and this could somehow get us out of this cycle. Do you agree with that, or this is too psychological than business or sustainability or social responsibility issues?
Yeah, thank you for that question and comment. I think definitely everything we have talked about so far regarding the individual responsibility and individual consumerism, it all relates to a psychological aspect or dimensions, and it's all also related to questions of identity as well. And the role of the media, I think, well, it's the question is, which media are we talking about? So are we talking about the journalistic media? And I think here there one responsibility definitely is to bring the problems of sustainability always to always report on the socio-ecological effects of our behavior in journalistic media, to actually not allow of what you were just saying, to not allow ignorance, for example, but to always make people aware. And then there are other media, like social media, for example, where people actually have the possibility, not all people, but many people have the possibility to actually raise their voice and talk about their perspectives and their experiences, and also their individual situations of everyday life. And I think it's very and here we have positive possibility to actually so that people actually get a voice who don't have a voice in journalistic media, so media that are produced by journalists. But then again, we also have many challenges there, or problems there, because what do we perceive in social media? Like we have not only the problem of the digital divide or digital inequality, for example. So not all people have access and can raise their voice, but then we also have the problems of the way discourses in social media are produced, like the whole issue of hate speech, for example. But still, I think there is a very positive and relevant possibility there of creating awareness for different problems, but also creating awareness of possibilities of shaping societies more sustainable. I think also here again, besides this dimension of media content that is produced in these different media, we again have to also acknowledge the material dimension that is there when we look at social media, because whenever we produce something on social media, for example, we have the problems of carbon emission in the data centers, for example. And I think besides the necessity of acknowledging the problems, I think it's there is another challenge, and that's the challenge or the problem of that so many problems already are acknowledged, and there's so much knowledge there on the problems of sustainability, but we have the gap between the knowledge and the practices. For example, in privacy research, for example, in our field of media and communication studies, there are concepts like the privacy paradox or privacy fatigue that stress that people know about the problems of exploitation of data and or the privacy risks in online communication. So there is the knowledge there, but it doesn't relate to a change in, or it doesn't lead to a change in the practices. So even though people know about the problems of privacy when they share their data online, they don't protect their data. And I think that's something similar that we're also perceiving regarding sustainability. There is already so much knowledge there. Of course, not everywhere. And not all people know, but there are so many people that already know about the problems, but we still have the problems in taking action. And that's not only on the individual level, but it's also on the meso and the macro level. So also regarding, also if we look at politics, for example, and I think it's also a problem because, again, because of the ideology of the capitalist system that we perceive this gap.
Thank you so much.
Regarding the gap you mentioned, I'm sorry, am I allowed to continue with a question?
Sure.
And is it okay for me to open my camera? I feel like a ghost.
Yeah.
If that's
amazing.
okay.
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, it seems like I'm not allowed to do that.
Oh, no.
Let me check the Zoom. Hi again.
Hi.
Okay, I exist. Okay, regarding the gap you mentioned, that there's a gap between knowledge and implementation. From my point of view, the problem still is with the acknowledgement, because many corporations rationalize their activities and actions, for example, the mining industry in Australia, the tobacco advocacy advertisement that happened, they start to make an evaluation for us to choose bad over worse, and when we are struggling with finding our norms, as you mentioned, we need to change these norms, but we do not understand how to prioritize them, And while we are struggling with them as individuals, as small businesses, as citizens, we cannot see the problem completely, and we cannot win in the conversation because they are always many steps ahead of us. They have the power, they have the money, they even have the news and journalism infrastructures, they have everything, and they can shift and change even our knowledge, our understanding of them. They can rationalize what they do, and this could be the problem. We need to find a way to put them in a position that they can no longer affect the market or affect our thoughts or advocate their opinions, which are actually cover-ups for their unsustainable and irresponsible actions. And I don't know how media can do that, but one thing I know for sure is that we are 8 billion on this planet, and if we each take one step towards understanding the matter, understanding the challenges, strategies, techniques, even lobbying techniques that these corporations apply, we can do good. We are looking at capitalism like a cycle that kind of avoids us from getting out of it, but maybe we need to look at it from another perspective. But I struggle with understanding the role that even individuals can play. And I know that you mentioned we cannot expect much from individuals from least developed countries, but there should be something that we can do. Where do you think we can start?
That's a really good question.
Where shall we start? I think, of course, everybody actually needs to start immediately in so many different ways as possible. So regarding all consumption patterns, for example, regarding all political actions, for example, and at the same time, because you were bringing up the psychological dimension, at the same time, I think also we have to be a little bit careful that it's not so overwhelming. So if we always stress that the situation is so complex and we have to take action everywhere, then we have to be careful that individuals, wherever they are living, are not overwhelmed and then step back and say, okay, this is just too much for me. But I think it has to be, the start has to be everywhere and immediately. And I also think that we have that we can perceive that so many people are taking actions everywhere on different on different levels. So like the transcultural social movements, like the Fridays for Future movement, for example, or the last generation movement, I think these are examples that, because they are transcultural and that they are happening in so many different countries, I think it already shows that people everywhere see the responsibility or also see the relevance of taking action. And also on the international political level with the SDGs that Franziska already mentioned, I think what's very relevant regarding the SDGs is to acknowledge that in the SDGs, also all countries are addressed actually. So with the Millennium Development Goals, it's not only the economic less and least developed countries that were in the focus, but now with the SDGs, it's like all countries. And the connection that we have regarding problems like regarding the socio-ecological effects, for example, the relations between all people worldwide because of globalization, for example, I think is also in there in the SDGs. But then again, also the SDGs, I think, even though there are so many positive aspects there, and I think also through the SDGs, the challenge of sustainability got so much more visible worldwide. Still, there are so many problems within the SDGs again that can be identified within the SDGs. For example, the problems of capitalism that we were coming back to in our discussion. It's not solved, even though not solved on an abstract way in the SDGs, because we still have the goal of economic growth in there, and that's so contradictory to so many other SDGs that we have, and it will always bring us back to the challenges of shaping societies in a real sustainable way.
I think that's amazing. I have to be a bit time cautious just to not extend this conversation too much, but I would love to, I really like the question, because that's a question that is around in so many debates, public debates, but also individual debates, like where to start, what to do. And I think one very simple thing to do on all levels, again, is to start to communicate about it, to talk about it. Not necessarily just, and this is something that is not dependent on Western or Eastern context or more or less developed countries. To talk about it, not only on an individual level, but on like a level of organizations, institutions, non-governmental organizations, movements. They trigger a lot of conversations here. But also on like a broader level, on a media level, if you think about journalists and journalism, I think to open up those conversations, to enable negotiation process about what sustainability actually means, is something that is desperately needed to agree on, to create a new idea and understanding and common sense. This is something that is very, very important from an organizational or corporate perspective. It's not about just the talking, but it is about the negotiation and the conversations about it within organizations and beyond. And I think like there's so many then examples that we can take as a starting point. You look at universities who start thinking about sustainability and how they not only implement it in their programs, but what they can do, and they try to have those conversations. But it's really like the least thing we can do to start talking about it, even on an individual level. So is there any kind of burning question or burning issue, something also, Sigrid, if you want to kind of just have anything still in mind, or if you're like, yeah, that's something I really want to say, then and otherwise we try to conclude this conversation. Any burning questions from the guests here?
I just want to mention something really quick. You mentioned the SDGs. SDG 4 concentrates on quality education, and I was thinking maybe instead of educating people of the crises or problems, environmental issues, social challenges that we are facing, we can concentrate on educating people on ongoing strategies or tactics that corporations or companies or anyone who's hurting our environment, society, or economy are the burden that they are pressing on our lives. after they understand the strategies, then we can educate them with the issues. You know, me as a person, I first need to know that people are posing their opinions on me. Then I can understand what's right and what's wrong. Maybe we can start with SDG 4, as you mentioned. You brought up the SDGs matter and agenda. And thank you so much. This is an honor for me to be here.
Thank you. Thanks so much for joining. Awesome. Great. And thanks, Jazz, who just said in the chat that sustainability is definitely not a burden. So that is something that will stick with us. Thanks, Sigrid. That is definitely true and very important. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sigrid, for being here today. That was an amazing conversation and very, very, great questions. Thanks for the conversation and for the chat. Thanks, everyone, for being here.
Thanks for being here, and thanks for the invitation, Franziska. Thank you.